In the darkest days of World War II, when the skies over Europe were a brutal battleground of fire and steel, a most unlikely hero emerged. It wasn't the largest aircraft in the Royal Air Force's arsenal, nor was it the most heavily armed or armored. In fact, on paper, it looked laughably inadequate, unarmed, made of wood, and far smaller than the imposing bombers that dominated the skies. Yet this aircraft, nicknamed the Wooden Wonder, would go on to become one of the most feared and respected machines of the entire war. This is the story of the de Havilland Mosquito, a plane that didn't just fight the Luftwaffe, it outsmarted them. By the late 1930s, aerial warfare had transformed beyond recognition. The Great War had introduced the concept of strategic bombing, but by the time the Second World War erupted, the philosophy had shifted dramatically. The great powers believed that the future of air combat lay in bigger, heavier bombers bristling with guns, armor plating, and large crews. These flying fortresses were meant to deliver devastating payloads deep behind enemy lines, protected by their own firepower. In Britain, the Royal Air Force followed the same logic, pouring resources into aircraft like the four-engine Avro Lancaster and the Handley Page Halifax, mighty bombers that could pulverize cities but required massive support to survive enemy skies. In this world of iron and firepower, the idea of a small, unarmed bomber seemed absurd, even suicidal, but Geoffrey de Havilland, founder of the de Havilland Aircraft Company and one of Britain's most visionary aircraft designers, saw things differently. He believed that brute force wasn't the only way to win a war in the air. Instead of trying to fight enemy fighters head-on, what if a bomber could simply fly faster than them? What if it could slip past radar, outrun interceptors, and deliver its payload before the enemy even knew it was there? It was a radical idea, and one that would face immense skepticism. De Havilland and his team proposed a revolutionary concept, an unarmed, lightweight bomber built not from precious aluminum or steel, but from wood. Its defense would not be armor or machine guns, but speed and agility. Speed is armor, they declared, a philosophy that would challenge the very foundations of military thinking. The Air Ministry was far from convinced. Officials scoffed at the proposal, questioning how a wooden aircraft could possibly survive the brutal realities of modern aerial combat. To them, the idea of removing defensive guns from a bomber was madness. But de Havilland persisted, confident that his design could prove them wrong. The gamble paid off. When the first prototype of the Mosquito took to the skies in 1940, it stunned everyone who saw it. Not only did it exceed all expectations, it shattered them. The aircraft was blisteringly fast, capable of reaching speeds over 400 miles per hour, faster than many frontline fighters of the era. It could soar to altitudes of 35,000 feet, far beyond the reach of most Luftwaffe interceptors, and because it was so light, it could carry a significant bomb load despite its compact size. All of this, and it was made mostly of wood. The choice of wood was more than a clever engineering trick. It was a stroke of strategic genius. Wartime Britain was suffering from severe shortages of metal, and aircraft aluminum was one of the most precious resources of all. By turning to wood, specifically birch plywood and lightweight balsa, de Havilland avoided competing for vital materials needed for other aircraft. But there was another advantage too. Wood was naturally radar absorbent, giving the Mosquito a degree of stealth before stealth technology even existed. And because wood construction required different skills than metalwork, the Mosquito could be built in furniture workshops, piano factories, and small local carpentry shops, spreading production across the nation and keeping it resilient against bombing. The aircraft's wooden frame was also surprisingly strong and flexible. It could absorb battle damage that might tear apart a metal fuselage, and it could be repaired quickly in the field using basic tools and materials. This combination of speed, stealth, and ease of maintenance made the Mosquito a dream weapon and a nightmare for the Luftwaffe. The true brilliance of the Mosquito, however, was its versatility. While it was originally conceived as a fast bomber, it quickly evolved into one of the most multi-role aircraft of the war. It became a reconnaissance plane, darting deep into enemy territory to photograph strategic targets. It served as a night fighter, hunting German bombers under the cover of darkness. It acted as a pathfinder, racing ahead of bomber streams to mark targets with flares. It even became a nuisance raider, launching daring low-altitude attacks on Gestapo headquarters, broadcasting stations, and railway lines, often with surgical precision. One of the Mosquito's greatest strengths was that it could operate without fighter escort. This was almost unheard of during World War II, when bombers typically relied on swarms of fighters to protect them from enemy interceptors. The Mosquito didn't need them. It was so fast and agile that most German fighters simply couldn't catch it. Even the feared Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf FW-190, the Luftwaffe's elite, struggled to close the distance. Time and again, German pilots scrambled to intercept Mosquito raids, only to watch helplessly as the wooden aircraft slipped beyond their reach. Its speed also enabled a new kind of precision warfare. The Mosquito could fly low and fast, hugging the terrain to avoid radar and anti-aircraft fire before popping up to deliver its bombs with pinpoint accuracy. This made it ideal for surgical strikes against critical targets that would have been too risky for larger bomber formations. Gestapo offices, radar stations, and enemy communications centers all found themselves under sudden and devastating attack from the Wooden Wonder. Perhaps the most legendary missions flown by Mosquito crews were those aimed not just at strategic targets, but at German morale itself. On January 30th, 1943, the 10th anniversary of the Nazi Party's rise to power, Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, was preparing to give a grand speech in Berlin. But just as the event was set to begin, the sirens wailed. A formation of Mosquito bombers had slipped into the German capital and dropped their payload on the radio station broadcasting the ceremony. The speech was abruptly cut off, and Göring was humiliated. The same day, another Mosquito raid struck the Gestapo headquarters in the city, underscoring the RAF's ability to hit anywhere, anytime. Göring was furious and deeply frustrated. Despite commanding one of the most powerful air forces in the world, he was powerless to stop these wooden pests from striking at the heart of the Reich. "It makes me green and yellow with envy," he later admitted, lamenting that Britain had managed to build such a remarkable aircraft while Germany had nothing like it. The psychological impact of the Mosquito's success cannot be overstated. For the Germans, it was a constant reminder that their skies were not safe. No matter how many fighters they scrambled, the Wooden Wonder kept coming. Too fast to intercept, too agile to pin down, too clever to predict. And for the Allies, it was a powerful symbol of ingenuity and resilience, proof that brains could triumph over brawn. The Mosquito's remarkable capabilities changed the way the Royal Air Force thought about warfare. Before its arrival, bombing campaigns were largely blunt force operations. Massive formations of heavy bombers lumbered through the skies, dropping thousands of tons of explosives in area bombing campaigns that caused widespread destruction but often lacked precision. Civilian casualties were inevitable, and many targets remained operational despite repeated raids. The Mosquito offered a different approach. It wasn't about sheer volume, it was about surgical accuracy and psychological shock. And this shift would prove immensely valuable to the Allied war effort. One of the most daring demonstrations of the Mosquito's precision came in 1944 during the raid on Amiens prison in German-occupied France. Intelligence revealed that members of the French resistance were being held there and were scheduled for execution. A conventional bomber attack would have leveled the prison and killed the prisoners. But a Mosquito strike offered a chance, albeit a slim one, to break open the walls and free them. Flying at treetop height, Mosquito crews roared toward the prison, releasing their bombs with breathtaking accuracy. The walls were breached, the guards were thrown into chaos, and dozens of resistance fighters escaped. Though not all survived, the mission demonstrated what was possible when speed, skill, and precision came together in a single operation. Similar missions followed. In Copenhagen, Mosquitoes targeted the Gestapo headquarters in a daring daylight raid, skimming rooftops to deliver their bombs. The attack not only crippled the Gestapo's operations, but also destroyed critical records on Danish resistance fighters, saving countless lives. These operations weren't just tactical victories, they were morale boosters. They showed occupied nations that the Allies could strike anywhere, even in the heart of Nazi power, and that resistance was not futile. The Luftwaffe, meanwhile, was thrown into disarray. German air defenses had been built to counter conventional bombers, slow, heavy, and predictable. Radar networks, flak batteries, and interceptor squadrons were all optimized for these targets. But the Mosquito didn't play by those rules. It came in low, fast, and often alone or in small groups, rendering many of these defenses ineffective. German radar operators often couldn't track it until it was too late. Anti-aircraft gunners struggled to hit a target moving so quickly and unpredictably. And fighter pilots, forced to burn fuel and risk their lives chasing a plane they could rarely catch, grew increasingly demoralized. This disruption had far-reaching consequences. Every Mosquito raid forced the Luftwaffe to divert valuable resources, planes, pilots, radar operators, away from other fronts. Interceptor units that could have been used to defend against the massive Allied bomber streams were instead tied up chasing ghosts. German aircraft engineers scrambled to develop faster interceptors capable of catching the elusive wooden bomber, but by the time these designs reached production, the tide of the war had already turned. The Mosquito wasn't just a thorn in Germany's side, it was a strategic headache that sapped their strength and stretched their defenses thin. The aircraft's versatility only deepened its impact. As the war progressed, specialized versions of the Mosquito were developed for an astonishing array of roles. Some were equipped with 4 20mm cannons and 4 303 machine guns, transforming them into lethal night fighters that prowled the skies over Britain and Europe, hunting down German bombers and V-1 flying bombs. Others were fitted with cameras instead of bombs, becoming some of the most effective reconnaissance platforms of the war. Their speed allowed them to penetrate deep into enemy territory and return with vital intelligence before the enemy even realized they had been there. There were even maritime variants that hunted German U-boats and shipping convoys, using rockets and bombs to deadly effect. Pathfinders, meanwhile, guided massive bomber raids by dropping flares and target markers with unmatched accuracy. In every role, the Mosquito excelled, a testament to the brilliance of its design. Few aircraft in history have proven so adaptable, and fewer still have done so with such consistent success. What made the Mosquito even more extraordinary was its efficiency. While 4-engine heavy bombers required large crews, often 7 or more men, the Mosquito typically carried just 2, a pilot and a navigator. This smaller crew requirement reduced casualties and simplified training. It also allowed for quicker production and deployment. At a time when manpower was one of Britain's most precious resources, this efficiency was more than a bonus. It was a necessity. The Germans, for their part, never stopped trying to counter the wooden wonder. They experimented with new tactics, such as flying high-altitude interception missions or deploying faster aircraft like the Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter, but even these cutting-edge planes had limited success. The Me 262, though fast, was plagued by reliability issues and appeared too late to make a significant difference. And even when German pilots did manage to intercept Mosquitoes, their small size, agility, and high-altitude performance made them exceptionally difficult targets. It was a humbling reality for the Luftwaffe. Despite their technological advancements and formidable resources, they were continually outmaneuvered by a plane that was, in many ways, the antithesis of everything they believed an effective bomber should be. The Mosquito's success was not just a triumph of engineering, it was a victory of philosophy. It proved that speed, agility, and adaptability could overcome brute strength and firepower. It demonstrated that innovation could turn apparent weaknesses, like the use of wood, into decisive advantages. The psychological warfare aspect of the Mosquito campaign cannot be overlooked either. Goering's frustration was shared widely within the German military hierarchy. Every successful raid eroded confidence in the Luftwaffe's ability to defend the Reich. Propaganda efforts to paint the German air defenses as impenetrable were undermined with each Mosquito attack that slipped through unscathed. Even Hitler himself is said to have been angered by the Mosquito's raids, particularly those that disrupted key Nazi events or targeted symbols of the regime's power. For a dictatorship that thrived on control and image, these humiliations were more damaging than the bombs themselves. Yet perhaps the greatest achievement of the Mosquito was not the destruction it caused, but the inspiration it provided. To the Allied public, it was a symbol of British ingenuity and resilience, proof that even in the face of overwhelming odds, clever thinking and daring innovation could prevail. It was also a testament to the power of collaboration. The Mosquito was not built by massive industrial complexes alone. It was crafted in small workshops, furniture factories, and local carpentry shops across the country. It was a national effort, and every rivet, every piece of wood, every coat of paint carried with it the determination of a nation fighting for survival. As the war neared its end, the Mosquito continued to serve with distinction. Even as jet aircraft began to appear, it remained relevant, its versatility and effectiveness unmatched. By the time production ceased, more than 7,700 Mosquitoes had been built in various configurations, each one a testament to a bold idea that defied conventional wisdom and changed the course of aerial warfare. The end of the war might have spelled the end for many legendary aircraft, but for the Mosquito, it was merely a new chapter. Its influence on aviation thinking was profound and long-lasting. Even as jet propulsion began to transform aerial warfare, the principles that had made the Mosquito so successful, speed, versatility, and precision, became cornerstones of post-war aircraft design. In many ways, it had been a generation ahead of its time. The concept of relying on speed as a form of defense would go on to shape the development of high-speed bombers and reconnaissance aircraft for decades. Jet-powered planes like the English Electric Canberra and even the iconic American SR-71 Blackbird carried forward the same philosophy. If you're fast enough, you don't need armor or guns. The Mosquito also left a legacy in terms of materials and manufacturing. During the war, the idea of building a high-performance combat aircraft primarily from wood seemed absurd, even reckless. But the success of the Mosquito proved that alternative materials could yield remarkable results if used intelligently. This opened the door to future experimentation with composites and non-traditional construction techniques, an approach that would eventually lead to the development of modern stealth materials and lightweight airframes. Even though metals would dominate the jet age, the lesson of the Mosquito remained. The material matters less than how you use it. Its influence extended beyond the technical realm. Strategically, the Mosquito demonstrated the value of multi-role platforms, aircraft that could be quickly adapted for a wide range of missions rather than being designed for a single specialized purpose. In the decades that followed, this philosophy would become standard practice. Modern fighters like the F-16 and F/A-18 are designed with versatility at their core, capable of switching from air-to-air combat to ground attack to reconnaissance with minimal modification. The Mosquito had proven the power of such flexibility long before these jets were even conceived. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Wooden Wonder was the way it redefined the balance between technology and tactics. Throughout history, military planners had often focused on building bigger, heavier, more powerful weapons, assuming that sheer strength would guarantee victory. The Mosquito turned that logic upside down. It showed that a well-conceived strategy, executed with speed, surprise, and precision, could overcome even the most formidable defenses. This lesson would resonate not just in aviation, but in military thinking more broadly. Speed and intelligence, it proved, could be more decisive than brute force. The Mosquito's story is also a human one, a story of courage, skill, and ingenuity. Flying the Mosquito was not for the faint of heart. Its missions were often deep behind enemy lines, with no defensive guns to rely on if things went wrong. Pilots had to trust in their aircraft's speed, their navigators' precision, and their own nerves of steel. Many Mosquito crews became legends in their own right, their daring exploits etched into the history of the war. They flew through flak and fighter screens, skimming treetops at terrifying speeds, often returning home with their planes riddled with bullet holes but their missions accomplished. Their bravery was matched only by the dedication of the engineers, craftsmen, and factory workers who built the aircraft. In an era when Britain was under constant threat of bombing, with resources stretched thin and manpower in short supply, the construction of the Mosquito was a remarkable achievement. It was built not in vast industrial complexes, but in small workshops and community factories. Cabinet makers, carpenters, and furniture craftsmen all contributed their skills to its construction. In this way, the Mosquito was not just a machine of war, it was a symbol of national unity and determination. The aircraft's success also carried an important message about leadership and innovation. The Mosquito might never have flown if Geoffrey de Havilland and his team had bowed to conventional wisdom. They faced skepticism, resistance, and even ridicule from those who believed their vision was unrealistic. But they persisted, confident in their belief that they were onto something revolutionary. Their story is a powerful reminder that true innovation often requires challenging the status quo and taking risks, even when others doubt you. As the war drew to a close, the Mosquito continued to serve in a variety of roles, from reconnaissance flights over occupied Europe to post-war policing missions in the Middle East and Asia. It even saw service in several foreign air forces, including those of Canada, Australia, and Sweden, and remained operational into the 1950s. For an aircraft conceived before radar-absorbent materials, jet propulsion, or guided missiles, its longevity was a testament to the brilliance of its design. Looking back, the Mosquito's story reads almost like a fable, a tale of how ingenuity, daring, and unconventional thinking triumphed over brute strength and overwhelming odds. At a time when the world believed that size and firepower were the keys to dominance, a wooden aircraft with no defensive guns rewrote the rules of aerial warfare. It outpaced, outmaneuvered, and outthought one of the most formidable air forces in history. It humiliated its enemies, inspired its allies, and left a legacy that continues to shape aviation today. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about the Mosquito is how it embodied the spirit of the time. It was a product of necessity, born from scarcity, forged in crisis, and perfected through ingenuity. Britain in the early 1940s was a nation under siege, battered by air raids and facing a relentless enemy. In that environment, the Mosquito was more than just a weapon. It was a statement. It said that no matter how dire the circumstances, innovation could still flourish. It said that cleverness could overcome brute force. And it said that even when resources were scarce, the human spirit was not. For the men who flew it, the Mosquito was more than just an aircraft. It was a trusted companion, a lifeline, and a weapon that gave them the confidence to face impossible odds. Pilots often spoke of the bond they felt with their aircraft, how it responded to their every command with grace and precision, how it seemed to come alive in their hands. Many described it as a joy to fly, even in the most dangerous circumstances. Its controls were responsive, its handling smooth, and its speed exhilarating. In the cockpit of a Mosquito, pilots felt invincible, and in many ways, they were. The Luftwaffe never found a true answer to the Mosquito. Despite their best efforts, they remained one step behind, struggling to adapt to an enemy that refused to fight on their terms. And in the end, this inability to counter the wooden wonder was emblematic of a larger truth. The German war machine, for all its might and sophistication, was often outmaneuvered by the Allies' capacity for innovation. The Mosquito was the perfect example of this dynamic, a plane that shouldn't have worked yet did, spectacularly. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Mosquito's legacy is how it excelled in missions that went far beyond traditional bombing runs. It was, in many ways, the ultimate precision weapon of its era, not just because of its speed and agility, but because of the daring tactics its crews were willing to attempt. The low-level strikes, often flown at altitudes of less than 100 feet, were among the most dangerous missions of the war. Pilots had to navigate treacherous terrain, dodge anti-aircraft fire, and hit their targets with pinpoint accuracy, all while relying entirely on speed for survival. Yet time and again, they pulled it off. The raid on the Gestapo headquarters in Oslo in September 1942 is one such example. Intelligence had revealed that the building contained critical files on Norwegian resistance members, and destroying them would deal a significant blow to German counterintelligence efforts. 3 Mosquitoes were tasked with the mission. Flying at near ground level across the North Sea, they popped up over the city at the last possible moment and unleashed their bombs with devastating precision. The building was reduced to rubble, and countless resistance fighters were spared capture and execution. The Germans were stunned, not just by the destruction, but by the audacity of the attack. How could an unescorted bomber fly hundreds of miles into occupied territory, strike a high-value target in broad daylight, and escape unscathed? This was the kind of question the Luftwaffe kept asking, and failing to answer. The truth was that the Mosquito fundamentally changed the calculus of air defense. Conventional bombers telegraphed their intentions well in advance. Radar operators could track them for miles, fighter squadrons could be scrambled to intercept them, and flak batteries had time to prepare their firing solutions. The Mosquito offered no such luxury. It was often invisible to radar until it was too late. Its small size and low altitude masked it from detection, and by the time it appeared on the horizon, the attack was already underway. Traditional defensive tactics simply didn't work. Another legendary mission that highlighted the Mosquito's audacity was the attack on the Shell House in Copenhagen in March 1945. The building served as the Gestapo's Danish headquarters and contained vital records on the resistance movement. Once again, a conventional bombing raid would have caused massive civilian casualties, but a precision strike by Mosquitoes promised to destroy the building while sparing the surrounding area. The plan was daring: a low-level approach at rooftop height, a synchronized strike, and a rapid escape. The attack was a success. The Gestapo's operations were crippled, and hundreds of resistance fighters were saved. Tragically, one Mosquito crashed into a nearby school, causing civilian casualties, a grim reminder of the risks involved in such daring missions. Yet even with this tragedy, the raid is still remembered as one of the most precise and impactful of the war. What made these operations even more remarkable was the fact that they were often carried out by small crews, usually just a pilot and a navigator. These 2 men bore the weight of missions that could shift the course of the war in an entire region. Their skill, coordination, and trust in one another were paramount. The pilot had to fly at breakneck speed just feet above the ground, while the navigator had to calculate course corrections with absolute precision, often under intense enemy fire. It was a dance of courage and calculation, one mistake away from disaster. And yet, again and again, they succeeded. The Mosquito's effectiveness also extended to psychological warfare. Beyond the material damage it caused, the very idea that nowhere in occupied Europe, not even the most heavily guarded targets, was truly safe had a profound impact on German morale. Cities deep within the Reich, previously considered untouchable, were suddenly vulnerable to surgical strikes. Command centers, intelligence headquarters, and propaganda facilities all found themselves within reach. Even Hitler's inner circle was not immune. On several occasions, mosquitoes bombed locations where Nazi officials were scheduled to give speeches, disrupting the carefully orchestrated machinery of Nazi propaganda and humiliating the regime on the world stage. The psychological effect wasn't limited to the Germans. For the occupied nations of Europe, the mosquito was a symbol of hope. The roar of its twin Merlin engines overhead was a reminder that the Allies had not forgotten them, that resistance was not futile, and that liberation was possible. Resistance groups often coordinated their activities around mosquito raids, using the chaos created by the attacks to sabotage rail lines, disrupt supply chains, or carry out assassinations. In this way, the mosquito wasn't just a weapon of destruction, it was a catalyst for resistance. Its speed also made it invaluable in one of the most crucial aspects of modern warfare: intelligence. Mosquito reconnaissance variants, stripped of all armament and equipped with high-resolution cameras, became the eyes of the Allied war effort. They flew deep into enemy territory, photographing everything from troop movements to industrial facilities to missile launch sites. Their work was instrumental in planning major operations, including the D-Day landings, where accurate intelligence on German fortifications and troop concentrations was essential. These missions were often as dangerous as combat sorties, yet mosquito crews embraced them with the same courage and professionalism. One of the most striking aspects of the mosquito story is how it consistently overachieved. Time and again, it was assigned missions considered too risky or too difficult for other aircraft, and it delivered results. Whether it was bombing a prison wall without harming the prisoners inside, hitting a single building in the middle of a densely populated city, or outrunning the Luftwaffe's best fighters over hundreds of miles, the Mosquito excelled. Its performance wasn't just impressive, it was almost miraculous. For the Luftwaffe, the Mosquito became an obsession. Göring's bitter complaints about the aircraft weren't just hyperbole. He had staked his reputation on the strength of Germany's air defenses, and the Mosquito exposed their weaknesses for the world to see. Every successful raid was a blow to his credibility and a reminder of the Reich's vulnerability. German engineers proposed numerous countermeasures, from new radar systems to jet-powered interceptors, but none could fully neutralize the threat. Even late in the war, with resources dwindling and morale collapsing, the Luftwaffe continued to divert aircraft and pilots to hunt the elusive wooden menace, a testament to the fear it inspired. The Mosquito's versatility even extended into anti-shipping roles, where it proved deadly against German U-boats and naval vessels. Armed with rockets and bombs, maritime variants patrolled the North Sea and the Atlantic, disrupting supply lines and sinking enemy vessels with deadly efficiency. Its speed allowed it to strike before enemy gunners could respond, and its agility made it difficult to hit. In this role, too, the Mosquito outperformed expectations, proving that it was more than just a bomber. It was a true multi-role platform long before that term entered the military lexicon. As the Mosquito's reputation grew, so too did its strategic importance to the Allied war effort. It was no longer just an aircraft used for daring raids or specialist missions. It had become an integral part of the overall air campaign against Nazi Germany. Its speed and precision complemented the brute force of the heavy bomber fleets, creating a two-pronged strategy that overwhelmed German defenses. While the lumbering Lancasters and Halifaxes carpet-bombed industrial centers and transportation hubs, the Mosquito struck at the heart of German command and control, taking out radar stations, communications hubs, and key decision-making centers. This combination was devastating. Germany found itself under constant pressure, unable to predict where the next blow would fall or how to defend against it. One of the most significant strategic roles the Mosquito played was as a pathfinder. In the chaos of nighttime bombing raids, accuracy was often poor. Entire bomber formations could miss their targets by miles, especially when flying blind through cloud cover or anti-aircraft fire. The Mosquito solved this problem. Equipped with sophisticated navigation equipment and flown by highly trained crews, Mosquito pathfinders would race ahead of the main bomber stream, locate the target, and drop flares or markers to guide the heavy bombers to their objectives. This dramatically increased the effectiveness of the RAF's strategic bombing campaign, reducing civilian casualties and ensuring that vital military targets were hit. Another key contribution was in electronic warfare. Special variants of the Mosquito were outfitted with radar jammers, chaff dispensers, and other electronic countermeasures designed to confuse and disrupt German defenses. These aircraft played a crucial role in blinding radar installations and misleading enemy interceptors, making it even harder for the Luftwaffe to respond effectively. Once again, the Mosquito was at the cutting edge of innovation, a wooden aircraft performing missions that would lay the groundwork for the future of electronic warfare. But it wasn't just in the skies over Europe that the Mosquito proved its worth. Its versatility made it a valuable asset in theaters around the world. In the Mediterranean, Mosquitoes supported Allied advances in Italy and North Africa, striking at enemy supply lines and providing reconnaissance for ground forces. In the Far East, they flew missions against Japanese positions in Burma and the Pacific, where their speed and range allowed them to operate in areas where other aircraft struggled. Even in these vastly different conditions, the Mosquito performed with the same reliability and effectiveness that had made it legendary in Europe. The aircraft's global service highlighted another of its key strengths: ease of maintenance. The wooden airframe was far simpler to repair than traditional metal construction. Damaged sections could be patched up quickly, often in the field, using basic materials and tools. This meant that Mosquito squadrons could remain operational even in remote and under-resourced locations, a critical advantage in a global war where logistics were often as important as firepower. Meanwhile, on the home front, the Mosquito's production became a symbol of British resilience. Factories across the United Kingdom, and even in Canada and Australia, churned out thousands of airframes. Many were built not by traditional aircraft manufacturers, but by small workshops, furniture companies, and skilled craftsmen who had never built an airplane before. This decentralized production model not only ensured a steady supply of aircraft, but also protected the program from disruption by German bombing raids. Even if one factory was destroyed, dozens more could continue the work. It was an ingenious approach that mirrored the aircraft's own philosophy: distributed, agile, and difficult to stop. The Germans were well aware of the damage the Mosquito was causing, and they devoted increasing resources to countering it. They developed faster variants of their frontline fighters, including the high-performance Focke-Wulf Ta-152 and the jet-powered Messerschmitt Me-262, specifically to try and catch the wooden wonder. But these solutions came too late, and in too few numbers to make a real difference. The Mosquito continued to outpace and outmaneuver its pursuers, its speed and agility still its greatest defenses. By 1944, the Mosquito had become so feared and respected that German cities were deploying new layers of anti-aircraft defenses specifically to counter it. Entire radar networks were reconfigured to detect low-flying aircraft, and fighter squadrons were repositioned to intercept possible Mosquito routes. Yet even these measures had limited success. The aircraft's unpredictability, its ability to strike anywhere at any time, meant that the Germans were always on the back foot, reacting rather than acting. One of the most telling signs of the Mosquito's impact came not from the battlefield, but from the words of the enemy. Hermann Göring, still enraged by his inability to stop the RAF's wooden menace, famously vented his frustration to his staff. "The British, who can afford aluminium better than we can, knocked together a beautiful wooden aircraft that every piano factory over there is building," he fumed. "They have the geniuses and we have the nincompoops." His bitterness spoke volumes. Despite Germany's advanced technology and industrial power, it had been outclassed by an aircraft built from plywood and glue, a humiliating testament to the power of innovation over brute force. The Mosquito also had a significant indirect impact on the course of the war. By forcing the Luftwaffe to dedicate fighters and resources to chasing it, the aircraft weakened Germany's overall air defense network. This made it easier for Allied heavy bombers to penetrate deep into German territory and deliver their payloads. It also provided vital breathing room for the build-up to D-Day. As the Allies prepared for the Normandy invasion, Mosquito reconnaissance flights mapped German defenses, while precision raids targeted critical infrastructure and transportation hubs. The information and disruption provided by these missions were instrumental in the success of Operation Overlord and the liberation of Western Europe. Even as the war entered its final months and Germany's defeat became inevitable, the Mosquito remained at the forefront of Allied air operations. It continued to strike high-value targets, gather crucial intelligence, and support ground offensives until the very end. And when victory in Europe was finally achieved in May 1945, the Mosquito could look back on a service record that few aircraft in history could match. It had flown more than 30,000 sorties, dropped thousands of tons of bombs, and conducted countless reconnaissance and special operations missions, all while maintaining one of the lowest loss rates of any aircraft in the war. When the guns finally fell silent and the world began to rebuild, many of the machines that had defined the war quickly faded into history. But the Mosquito was not one of them. Its story didn't end with the surrender of Nazi Germany. Far from it. In the turbulent years that followed 1945, the Mosquito continued to prove its worth, serving in new roles and new conflicts, and influencing generations of aircraft designers and military strategists. It was as if the world had only just begun to appreciate the full extent of what the Wooden Wonder could do. In the immediate post-war period, many air forces found themselves grappling with a paradox. The jet age was dawning, with revolutionary aircraft like the Gloster Meteor and the Messerschmitt Me 262 pointing the way forward. Yet despite these technological leaps, there remained a pressing need for reliable, versatile, and battle-proven aircraft, and the Mosquito fit that description perfectly. Its speed and range still made it highly competitive even in a world of early jets, and its ability to perform multiple roles ensured it remained valuable in peacetime operations. The Royal Air Force kept the Mosquito in service well into the late 1940s and early 1950s. Many were converted for reconnaissance work, photographing vast stretches of post-war Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, as nations redrew borders and new tensions emerged. In an era before spy satellites, these missions were essential for gathering intelligence on Soviet troop movements, infrastructure projects, and potential flashpoints in the early stages of the Cold War. The Mosquito's high speed and ceiling made it ideal for such operations, often flying too high and too fast for interceptor aircraft of the time to catch. Other Mosquito variants served in maritime patrol roles, monitoring shipping lanes and hunting submarines in a world still haunted by the specter of undersea warfare. Some were adapted for meteorological research, flying through storms and weather fronts to collect data vital for the emerging science of long-range forecasting. The aircraft's reliability, ease of maintenance, and long range made it a natural choice for these new, non-combat missions. But even after the war, the Mosquito's combat career wasn't quite over. It saw active service in several post-war conflicts, including the Malayan Emergency, where it flew counterinsurgency operations against communist guerrillas in the dense jungles of Southeast Asia. Its ability to deliver precise strikes in difficult terrain made it a valuable asset in these campaigns. Canadian, Australian, and Swedish air forces also continued to operate Mosquitoes into the 1950s, using them for a mix of reconnaissance, training, and even frontline duties. Despite its continued success, the Mosquito's days were numbered. By the mid-1950s, jet aircraft had advanced to the point where piston engine designs could no longer compete. Jets were faster, climbed higher, and carried more advanced weapons and sensors. Slowly, the Mosquito was retired from frontline service. Yet even as it disappeared from active duty, its influence loomed large. Designers of next-generation aircraft studied its aerodynamic efficiency, its lightweight construction techniques, and its multi-role versatility. The lessons it had taught during the war were baked into the DNA of modern combat aircraft. Its legacy was perhaps most evident in the rise of high-speed reconnaissance platforms. The English Electric Canberra, one of the most successful British jets of the early Cold War, was often described as the Mosquito's spiritual successor. Like the Wooden Wonder, the Canberra relied on speed and altitude rather than defensive armament to survive. And decades later, the legendary SR-71 Blackbird, the fastest jet ever built, would take this philosophy to its ultimate conclusion, outrunning any potential threat rather than trying to fight it. In this way, the Mosquito's spirit lived on long after the last wooden airframe had been retired. But the Mosquito's influence wasn't limited to military aviation. Its success also encouraged engineers to think more creatively about materials and manufacturing. The idea that a high-performance combat aircraft could be made from something as humble as wood had once been considered ridiculous. Yet the Mosquito had not only proven it possible, it had shown that unconventional materials could offer unique advantages. This mindset paved the way for future experimentation with composite materials, which today form the backbone of modern aerospace engineering. Carbon fiber, fiberglass, and advanced resin composites all owe something to the trail first blazed by the Mosquito's birch plywood fuselage. The Wooden Wonder also left a profound cultural mark. It became a symbol of British ingenuity and resilience, celebrated not just as a weapon of war, but as a work of art and engineering brilliance. Veterans who flew it often described it as the finest aircraft they had ever flown, fast, agile, and responsive, yet forgiving and reliable. Its reputation was such that it was often called the pilot's aircraft, a machine that seemed to anticipate the needs of the men at the controls. For many who served in the RAF during and after the war, flying a Mosquito was a career highlight. Today, surviving Mosquitoes are treasured relics of a bygone era. Only a handful remain airworthy, lovingly restored by museums and enthusiasts around the world. When they take to the skies at air shows, their twin Merlin engines roaring in harmony, they never fail to draw crowds. For those who know their history, watching a Mosquito fly is like witnessing a piece of living history, a reminder of a time when wood and glue outpaced steel and jet fuel, and when bold ideas changed the course of a global conflict. The continued fascination with the Mosquito speaks to something deeper than just its technical achievements. It embodies a philosophy that remains as relevant today as it was in the 1940s, that innovation thrives in adversity, that unconventional thinking can overcome overwhelming odds, and that sometimes the simplest ideas are the most powerful. In an age of hypersonic missiles and stealth bombers, the lessons of the Mosquito still resonate. It reminds us that technology alone doesn't win wars. Creativity, adaptability, and daring do. The Mosquito's story is not just about an aircraft. It's about the people who believed in it when others didn't. It's about the engineers who refused to accept conventional wisdom, the craftsmen who built it with their hands, and the pilots who pushed it to its limits. It's about a nation under siege, finding strength in innovation and unity. Above all, it's about the power of human ingenuity to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary, to transform wood and glue into one of the most formidable weapons of the 20th century. By the time the last Mosquito left service, its reputation had already achieved something close to mythic status. It was spoken of not merely as an aircraft, but as a symbol, a piece of living proof that intelligence, adaptability, and audacity could triumph over brute force and conventional thinking. And perhaps nowhere was this more evident than in the comparisons drawn between the Mosquito and its contemporaries. While many aircraft of the Second World War were technological marvels in their own right, few could match the sheer range of roles, missions, and successes that the Wooden Wonder achieved. Take, for instance, the American B-17 Flying Fortress, a machine that embodied the prevailing philosophy of the time. It was heavily armed, bristling with machine guns, and designed to survive waves of enemy fighters by fighting them off. It was tough, it was powerful, and it could deliver a massive payload. But it was also slow, predictable, and required significant escort protection to survive. In contrast, the Mosquito rejected that entire design ethos. It carried no defensive weapons at all, relied on speed and agility rather than armor, and often operated completely alone. And yet, its mission success rate was astonishingly high, in many cases far higher than those of heavier, more heavily armed bombers. It wasn't just a different kind of aircraft, it was a different way of thinking about air power. Even Germany's own advanced bombers and fighters struggled to match it. The Junkers Ju-88, a versatile twin-engine workhorse of the Luftwaffe, was slower, less maneuverable, and far less flexible in its roles. The Heinkel He-111, another mainstay of Germany's bomber fleet, was an easy target for Allied fighters by the later stages of the war. Even Germany's most advanced piston-engined fighters, such as the Focke-Wulf FW-190 and the Messerschmitt Bf-109, found it difficult to intercept the Mosquito once it was at altitude and operating at speed. The irony was hard to ignore. Germany, the nation that had pioneered many of the most advanced aviation technologies of the era, was being consistently outclassed by a wooden aircraft built in British furniture factories. One of the reasons the Mosquito inspired such deep respect, and even fear, among its adversaries was its unpredictability. Whereas heavy bomber raids could often be anticipated based on known flight paths and strategic priorities, Mosquito missions were anything but predictable. They might target a Gestapo office one day, a radar installation the next, and a propaganda ministry the day after that. They could appear over Berlin in broad daylight or strike deep into Norway in the middle of the night. The Luftwaffe never knew when or where the next raid would come, and that uncertainty was as psychologically damaging as the bombs themselves. It forced Germany to spread its defenses thin, stretching resources that were already under strain. And while its speed and versatility made it a nightmare for enemy planners, it also made the Mosquito a darling of Allied strategists. Its ability to conduct rapid, precise strikes allowed the Allies to pursue objectives that would have been impossible with conventional bombers. Want to destroy a single building without flattening the surrounding city? Send in the Mosquito. Need to deliver a propaganda blow by interrupting a Nazi rally or disrupting a radio broadcast? The Mosquito could do it. Require high-resolution reconnaissance photos of a key secret weapons site? A Mosquito could be over the target and back before the enemy even realized it had been there. It was, in short, the perfect instrument for a new kind of warfare, one defined not by sheer destructive power, but by precision, speed, and psychological impact. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about the Mosquito's operational record is how consistently it delivered results. Across tens of thousands of sorties in theaters ranging from Europe to the Pacific, it maintained one of the lowest loss rates of any combat aircraft in the war. This was despite the fact that it often flew without escorts, deep into enemy territory and against some of the most formidable air defenses in the world. That reliability made it a favorite among crews, many of whom described it as a joy to fly, fast, responsive, and surprisingly forgiving for such a high-performance machine. Pilots often spoke of the sense of confidence they felt in the cockpit, knowing that their best defense was the very aircraft beneath them. It's worth noting, too, that the Mosquito's impact wasn't limited to the military sphere. It had a powerful propaganda value of its own. Newsreels of the time often featured footage of Mosquito raids, highlighting the daring and precision of the RAF's wooden bomber. The aircraft became a symbol of British ingenuity and resolve, a kind of David to Germany's Goliath. Its very existence sent a message that the British could take limited resources, a bold idea, and sheer determination, and turn them into a weapon capable of striking fear into the heart of the Nazi war machine. For a nation that had endured the Blitz and stood alone against tyranny in the early years of the war, that message was deeply resonant. In many ways, the Mosquito represented a broader shift in military thinking that was taking place during the war. The conflict had started with a focus on mass, bigger armies, bigger tanks, bigger bombers. But as the war progressed, speed, precision, and intelligence became increasingly important. The Mosquito embodied this shift perfectly. It wasn't the biggest, the heaviest, or the most heavily armed aircraft in the sky, but it was one of the smartest. And in modern warfare, intelligence often trumps brute strength. Even today, historians and aviation experts continue to study the Mosquito for the lessons it offers. Its success demonstrates the power of asymmetry, the idea that a smaller, more agile force can defeat a larger, more powerful one by exploiting its weaknesses and refusing to fight on its terms. It shows how innovation often emerges not from abundance, but from scarcity, from the need to solve problems with limited resources and unconventional thinking. And it reminds us that technology alone is not enough. What matters is how that technology is used, how strategy, tactics, and creativity combine to turn a concept into a decisive advantage. In this sense, the Mosquito's story is about far more than an aircraft. It's about a philosophy of warfare, one that values agility over bulk, intelligence over brute force, and innovation over convention. It's about the willingness to challenge assumptions and rethink what's possible. And it's about the courage to take risks, to build a bomber without guns, to trust in speed rather than armor, and to believe that wood could defeat steel. The decades following the Second World War only cemented the Mosquito's place in aviation lore. As the war receded into history, its story was told and retold, not just in technical manuals and military histories, but in books, documentaries, and even films. Each retelling highlighted a different aspect of its brilliance, its audacity, its ingenuity, its relentless effectiveness, and the sheer improbability of its success. The more time passed, the clearer it became that the Mosquito wasn't just one of many successful aircraft of the war, it was one of the most extraordinary ever built. One reason the Mosquito's legend endured is because it represented the triumph of creativity over convention, a theme that resonated long after the guns fell silent. In an age defined by industrial might and mechanized warfare, the idea that a wooden aircraft built in furniture factories and workshops could outpace and outwit one of the most advanced military machines in history was profoundly inspiring. It suggested that innovation wasn't just the domain of vast industrial empires or deep pockets. It could emerge from ingenuity, resourcefulness, and bold thinking. This narrative, the underdog that beat the odds, appealed to a post-war world still grappling with the consequences of conflict and searching for lessons to apply to a rapidly changing future. Aviation enthusiasts, too, were captivated by the Mosquito story. Pilots who flew it spoke of it with a reverence usually reserved for sports cars or fine musical instruments. Its handling was legendary, smooth, responsive, and agile. It could climb like a fighter, cruise like a bomber, and turn with the grace of an aircraft half its size. Its twin Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same power plants that propelled the iconic Spitfire, gave it a roar that was unmistakable, a sound that even decades later evokes a powerful sense of nostalgia for those who hear it. At air shows and museums around the world, the sight and sound of a restored Mosquito in flight continues to draw crowds, a living testament to its enduring appeal. The Mosquito's legend was also kept alive by the men who flew and maintained it. Many of them went on to write memoirs or give interviews later in life, sharing their first-hand accounts of daring missions and close calls. Their stories added a human dimension to the aircraft's legacy, tales of camaraderie, courage, and determination that transformed the Mosquito from a mere machine into something much more profound. One veteran described it as a plane that felt alive, while another said, "It wasn't just a bomber, it was a miracle." These personal recollections helped ensure that the Mosquito's legacy was passed down not just as a technical achievement, but as a deeply human story. In the decades since the war, historians have continued to reassess the Mosquito's significance, and if anything, its reputation has only grown. Many now argue that it was one of the most strategically important aircraft of the conflict, not because of the sheer tonnage of bombs it dropped, but because of the disproportionate impact it had on enemy strategy and morale. It forced the Luftwaffe to rethink its entire air defense doctrine, strained German resources, and delivered blows that were as psychological as they were physical. In an era when most bombers were measured by how much they could destroy, the Mosquito was measured by how much it could disrupt, and in that regard, it was without equal. The aircraft has also become a staple of military education, often cited in staff colleges and war colleges as an example of innovative thinking and asymmetric strategy. Its design and operational philosophy are studied alongside other great military innovations, such as the Blitzkrieg or the aircraft carrier, as examples of how breakthroughs in thinking can change the nature of warfare. For modern military planners, the lessons of the Mosquito are as relevant today as they were in the 1940s. Flexibility, speed, and unpredictability are often more valuable than sheer size and firepower. Culturally, the Mosquito has taken on an almost mythical status. It appears in countless documentaries, books, and television series, often portrayed as the quintessential British aircraft, ingenious, understated, and devastatingly effective. Films like 633 Squadron and Mosquito Squadron from the 1960s romanticized its exploits, embedding its image in the popular imagination. Even today, it's not uncommon to see the Mosquito featured in video games, novels, and historical dramas, where it continues to capture the imagination of new generations. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about the Mosquito's legacy is how it transcends national boundaries. While it was a British design, it served with distinction in the air forces of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and even post-war European nations. Its success was celebrated not just in Britain but across the Allied world, where it became a symbol of cooperation, ingenuity, and shared sacrifice. In Canada, where many Mosquitoes were built under license, it remains a point of national pride. In Australia and New Zealand, its service in the Pacific Theater is remembered as a key contribution to the Allied victory in that region. The aircraft's reputation even earned it respect from its former enemies. German pilots who faced the Mosquito often spoke of it with admiration, even grudging awe. Many admitted that trying to shoot one down was one of the most difficult tasks they faced during the war. Some Luftwaffe veterans even credited the Mosquito with changing the way they thought about air combat, forcing them to rethink tactics that had worked against slower, heavier bombers. Such was the respect it commanded that even in defeat, the Germans could not help but acknowledge its brilliance. The Wooden Wonder's influence extends into the modern era in subtle but significant ways. Today's advanced aircraft, from stealth bombers to reconnaissance drones, embody many of the principles that the Mosquito pioneered: speed, stealth, flexibility, and precision. The idea that a platform should be able to adapt quickly to new roles, strike with surgical accuracy, and avoid enemy defenses rather than overwhelm them. All of these concepts trace their lineage, at least in part, back to the Mosquito. It's no exaggeration to say that many of the technologies and tactics that define modern air power owe something to the lessons first learned with a wooden bomber over the skies of wartime Europe. As the 21st century unfolds, the Mosquito's story continues to inspire not just aviators and historians, but engineers, innovators, and strategists across countless fields. Its legacy serves as a reminder that progress often comes from questioning assumptions and daring to do things differently. It shows that constraints, whether they be material shortages, strategic challenges, or resource limitations, can spark some of the most creative and effective solutions. And it proves that even in the most desperate circumstances, brilliance can flourish. What makes the Mosquito's legacy so compelling isn't just its technical achievement or its military record, it's the deeper symbolism it carries. More than almost any other aircraft of the Second World War, the Mosquito represents the triumph of ingenuity over adversity, of bold thinking over rigid doctrine, and of human creativity over technological dogma. It is, in many ways, a story about possibility, about what can be achieved when necessity forces people to look beyond the obvious and embrace the unconventional. When Geoffrey de Havilland and his team first proposed the concept of a fast, unarmed bomber built from wood, they weren't just challenging the technical norms of the time. They were challenging an entire mindset. The prevailing wisdom of the 1930s and early 1940s held that bigger was always better, that armor and firepower were the keys to survival, and that new technologies like aluminum construction and heavy defensive armament were the future. To reject all of that, to build something smaller, lighter, faster, and made of a material that many considered obsolete, was a radical act of defiance. It was also an act of extraordinary vision, and it was a vision born not of luxury, but of necessity. Britain in 1940 was a nation under siege. The Luftwaffe's relentless bombing campaign had devastated cities and industries, and the resources needed to build modern aircraft were scarce. De Havilland's solution, to use non-strategic materials like birch and balsa and to rely on civilian craftsmen instead of overburdened factories, wasn't just clever, it was essential. It allowed Britain to build a world-class combat aircraft without straining its limited supply of metals or manpower. In this way, the Mosquito was a product of its time, a weapon forged in the crucible of crisis. But necessity alone doesn't explain its success. What made the Mosquito remarkable wasn't just that it solved a problem, it was that it did so brilliantly. The choice of wood didn't just make the aircraft cheaper and easier to produce, it made it lighter, more agile, and less visible to radar. The decision to forego defensive armament didn't just save weight, it allowed the Mosquito to fly faster than most fighters and outmaneuver anything sent to intercept it. Every design choice, from its aerodynamic shape to its twin Merlin engines, was driven by a single cohesive philosophy. Speed is life, and that philosophy proved devastatingly effective. This idea, that speed, agility, and intelligence can outweigh brute strength, remains one of the Mosquito's most important lessons. It's a lesson that extends far beyond aviation. In business, in science, in technology, and even in personal endeavors, the principle holds true. Success often belongs not to those with the most resources, but to those who use their resources most creatively. The Mosquito is a powerful reminder that constraints are not barriers to innovation, they are catalysts for it. It also illustrates another critical lesson, the importance of questioning assumptions. When the Air Ministry initially rejected de Havilland's proposal, it wasn't because they lacked intelligence or vision. It was because they were trapped by the prevailing dogma of their time. They couldn't conceive of a bomber without guns or armor because everything they knew told them such a machine would be doomed. Yet by breaking free of those assumptions, de Havilland and his team created something truly revolutionary. The Mosquito's story teaches us that innovation often requires challenging the common sense of the day and daring to imagine alternatives. The aircraft's legacy also speaks to the power of collaboration and distributed effort. The Mosquito wasn't built by a single company or a single factory. It was the product of a nationwide effort that brought together engineers, craftsmen, furniture makers, and ordinary citizens. In an age of total war, this collaboration was essential, but it also demonstrated the power of collective ingenuity. The same principle applies today in fields as diverse as technology, medicine, and climate science. The most groundbreaking solutions often emerge from collaboration across disciplines, industries, and communities. There's another layer to the Mosquito's symbolism too, one that speaks to the broader human experience of the Second World War. At its heart, the conflict was a struggle between two visions of the world, one based on domination, brutality, and sheer force, and another rooted in resilience, creativity, and freedom. The Mosquito, in its own way, embodied the latter. It was a machine designed not to overpower, but to outthink, not to crush, but to outmaneuver. It was a weapon that reflected the values of the society that built it, resourceful, adaptable, and determined to find a way, no matter the odds. For many of the men who flew it, the Mosquito also came to represent something deeply personal. In the unforgiving world of aerial combat, where life and death could hinge on a split-second decision or a single mechanical failure, the Mosquito was a trusted ally. Pilots often spoke of the confidence it gave them, the knowledge that if they did their job right, the aircraft would take care of the rest. It was fast enough to outrun danger, strong enough to absorb punishment, and agile enough to dance through the most intense flak barrages. In a war where so much was uncertain, that reliability was priceless. The Mosquito's story also serves as a reminder that great achievements often come from unexpected places. Few would have predicted in 1939 that one of the most effective aircraft of the war would be made largely of wood. Fewer still would have believed that an unarmed bomber could consistently outfight the most powerful air force in the world. And yet, that is exactly what happened. The Mosquito defied expectations at every turn, proving that innovation is not limited by materials, by precedent, or by the opinions of experts. It is limited only by imagination and the courage to pursue it. Even today, more than 8 decades after its first flight, the Mosquito's lessons remain strikingly relevant. In an age defined by rapid technological change and global challenges, the ability to think creatively, adapt quickly, and challenge conventional wisdom is more important than ever. The world faces complex problems, from climate change to cybersecurity to geopolitical instability, that cannot be solved with brute force alone. They require the same qualities that made the Mosquito great: agility, innovation, and a willingness to see the world differently. The Mosquito's legend has endured not only because of its achievements during the war, but also because of the timeless truths it represents. At its core, the story of this aircraft is a story about resilience, about the ability to turn adversity into opportunity, limitations into advantages, and challenges into triumphs. It is about how, even in the darkest moments of human history, ingenuity and determination can produce something truly extraordinary. And that is why, more than 80 years after its first flight, the Mosquito still captures the imagination of historians, engineers, and aviation enthusiasts alike. In many ways, the Mosquito's continued relevance is due to how perfectly it encapsulates the essence of innovation. Innovation is not just about new technology or advanced materials. It's about new ways of thinking. It's about asking, what if, when everyone else is saying, it can't be done? That's exactly what Geoffrey de Havilland and his team did when they proposed a wooden bomber with no defensive armament. They didn't have the resources to build a conventional aircraft, so they built an unconventional one instead. They didn't have the luxury of overwhelming firepower, so they relied on speed and surprise. And in doing so, they didn't just create a successful aircraft, they created a paradigm shift. The Mosquito also stands as a testament to the idea that quality can outweigh quantity. Throughout the war, nations competed to build more tanks, more ships, more planes. But the Mosquito proved that one aircraft, if designed and used cleverly, could achieve results out of all proportion to its size or number. It wasn't produced in the same quantities as the B-17 or the Lancaster, but its impact was just as significant, if not more so. It punched far above its weight, delivering strategic and psychological blows that rippled far beyond the physical damage it caused. This is a lesson that resonates far beyond the battlefield. In business, in science, in life itself, the smartest solution is often not the biggest or the most powerful, but the most well-conceived. Another reason the Mosquito continues to inspire is its sheer elegance, not just in design, but in purpose. Everything about the aircraft was purposeful, from its lightweight construction to its streamlined shape to its twin-engine configuration. There was no excess, no waste, just pure efficiency. And that efficiency translated directly into performance. It's why the Mosquito could do things other aircraft couldn't. It's why it could strike deep into enemy territory and return without escort. It's why it could switch roles, from bomber to fighter to reconnaissance plane, with ease. Its design was a masterclass in simplicity and effectiveness, qualities that remain the hallmarks of great engineering to this day. The human stories behind the Mosquito's success also continue to resonate. This was an aircraft that demanded and rewarded skill and courage. Flying at treetop level over enemy territory, often under heavy fire, required nerves of steel and precision flying. Navigating at high speed, often with only seconds to react, required extraordinary teamwork and trust between pilot and navigator. Many Mosquito crews became legends in their own right, their exploits celebrated in the annals of military history. Their courage and professionalism were as much a part of the aircraft's success as its speed or design. Without them, the Mosquito would have been just another machine. With them, it became a weapon of remarkable effectiveness. The Mosquito's enduring appeal also lies in its ability to surprise us, even now. Modern audiences, accustomed to the sleek, high-tech world of jet fighters and stealth bombers, often find it astonishing that one of the most successful combat aircraft in history was made largely of wood and glue. It's a reminder that technology is not always about complexity. Sometimes the simplest solutions, executed brilliantly, can achieve the most spectacular results. It's a lesson that still resonates today, especially in an age where innovation is often equated with high-tech sophistication. The Mosquito reminds us that elegance, efficiency, and ingenuity are just as powerful as raw technological might. Perhaps most importantly, the Mosquito teaches us about the power of vision. When de Havilland and his team first pitched their idea, they faced skepticism and resistance from almost every corner of the establishment. Many believed the project was doomed before it even began. But they believed in their vision, and they had the courage to pursue it. That belief, that willingness to defy convention and push forward in the face of doubt, was as critical to the Mosquito's success as any technical innovation. It's a lesson that resonates in every field of human endeavor. The greatest breakthroughs often begin with an idea that others dismiss as impossible. Even as technology continues to evolve and new generations of aircraft push the boundaries of speed, stealth, and capability, the Mosquito remains relevant. Its story is taught in engineering schools as an example of innovative design under constraint. Its tactics are studied in military academies as models of asymmetric warfare. And its spirit, that combination of daring, ingenuity, and relentless pursuit of excellence, continues to inspire inventors, designers, and strategists around the world. In many ways, the Mosquito's greatest legacy is not the missions it flew or the enemies it defeated, but the ideas it represents. As we look back on its remarkable history, it's clear that the Mosquito was far more than just an aircraft. It was a turning point, a machine that redefined what was possible in aerial warfare and reshaped the way nations thought about air power. It was a bridge between eras, pointing the way toward a future where speed, precision, and flexibility would define military strategy. And above all, it was a testament to the extraordinary things that can be achieved when human creativity is unleashed. The fact that the Mosquito is still spoken of with such reverence, that it still inspires awe and admiration more than 8 decades after its debut, is perhaps the greatest testament of all. It means that its story still matters. It means that the lessons it teaches are still relevant. And it means that even in an age of supersonic jets and unmanned drones, a wooden aircraft from the 1940s can still remind us of what true innovation looks like. The Mosquito's place in history is secure not only because of what it accomplished during the Second World War, but also because of how it reshaped the very framework of military thinking. Before its arrival, air power was often seen as a blunt instrument, a force of overwhelming destruction designed to crush the enemy through mass and might. Bombers were judged by their payloads, their defensive armament, and their ability to survive waves of enemy fighters. Fighters were measured by their firepower and maneuverability in dogfights. The Mosquito challenged and transcended those definitions. It proved that air power could be something else, something more precise, more intelligent, and more strategic. Its success forced militaries around the world to rethink their priorities. No longer was the emphasis solely on brute force. Now, speed, agility, and versatility were equally important. The lessons learned from the Mosquito influenced not just bomber and reconnaissance aircraft, but also the evolution of fighter design, electronic warfare platforms, and even missiles. The idea that a weapon's effectiveness could come not from its size or firepower, but from its ability to evade, outthink, and outmaneuver. The enemy would go on to shape decades of military doctrine. The Mosquito also helped shape the post-war landscape of intelligence and reconnaissance. Before its introduction, reconnaissance aircraft were often slow, vulnerable platforms that required heavy protection. The Mosquito changed that paradigm completely. It demonstrated that intelligence could be gathered at high speed with minimal risk and with extraordinary precision. This concept would become a cornerstone of Cold War strategy, influencing everything from the design of high-altitude spy planes like the U-2 to the development of reconnaissance satellites. The simple idea that you can't shoot what you can't catch, embodied so perfectly by the Mosquito, would remain a guiding principle of intelligence operations for decades. But beyond its technical and strategic legacy, the Mosquito also left behind a powerful cultural and emotional imprint. For the men and women who lived through the Second World War, it became a symbol of hope and defiance. It was proof that the Allies could innovate their way out of seemingly impossible challenges, that they could turn scarcity into strength, and that they could strike at the heart of tyranny with speed and precision. For those living under Nazi occupation, the sight, or even the sound, of a Mosquito overhead was a reminder that liberation was coming. It was a small but powerful sign that the fight was not over, and that the Allies were capable of reaching even the most distant and well-guarded corners of the Reich. This symbolic power extended well beyond the war years. In the decades that followed, the Mosquito became a touchstone for discussions about innovation, leadership, and the human capacity for problem-solving. Business leaders cited it as an example of how constraints can fuel creativity. Engineers studied its design as a model of efficiency and simplicity. Military strategists used its story to illustrate the importance of adaptability and thinking beyond conventional doctrine. In every field where ingenuity and daring are valued, the Mosquito's story has something to teach. Perhaps the most extraordinary thing about the Mosquito, though, is how modern it still feels. Despite being designed and built more than 80 years ago, its core principles, speed, stealth, versatility, and precision, remain at the heart of 21st century warfare. Today's most advanced aircraft, from stealth bombers to multi-role fighters, still embody the same ideas that made the Mosquito so effective. Even unmanned aerial vehicles, with their emphasis on agility and precision, owe something to the legacy of the wooden wonder. The fact that a wooden propeller-driven aircraft from the 1940s can still feel relevant in an era of hypersonic flight and artificial intelligence is a testament to just how far ahead of its time it was. And yet, for all its strategic and technological significance, perhaps the Mosquito's greatest legacy lies in the realm of inspiration. It shows us what is possible when people refuse to accept the limits imposed by circumstance, when they choose to innovate rather than surrender to conventional thinking. It shows us that solutions to complex problems can come from the most unexpected places. And it shows us that even in the most desperate of times, human creativity has the power to change the course of history. The story of the Mosquito is, ultimately, a story about people, about the visionaries who dared to imagine it, the craftsmen who built it, the pilots who flew it, and the countless individuals who contributed to its success. It is a story about a nation under siege that found strength in innovation and unity. It is a story about courage, not just the courage to fly into danger, but the courage to think differently, to challenge assumptions, and to believe in an idea when everyone else says it's impossible. As we reflect on the Mosquito's extraordinary journey, we are reminded that history is often shaped not by the biggest or the strongest, but by the boldest and the most imaginative. The wooden wonder was not the most powerful aircraft of the Second World War, nor was it the most heavily armed or the most technologically advanced, but it was, in many ways, the most brilliant. It combined simplicity with sophistication, speed with subtlety, and innovation with purpose. And in doing so, it outsmarted one of the most formidable air forces the world had ever seen. Even now, when historians speak of the great aircraft of the Second World War, the Spitfire, the Mustang, the B-17, the Mosquito is always among them. But it stands apart in one crucial way. It wasn't just an instrument of war. It was a lesson in how wars are won. They are won not just with firepower, but with ingenuity, not just with numbers, but with ideas, and not just with brute strength, but with the courage to try something new. As the roar of its twin Merlin engines fades into history, the legacy of the Mosquito endures, in the aircraft that followed it, in the doctrines it inspired, and in the imaginations of those who continue to marvel at its story. It remains a symbol of what humanity can achieve when it refuses to be bound by the limits of the present and dares to envision a different future. As the decades pass and the veterans of the Second World War grow fewer, the importance of stories like that of the Mosquito only increases. They remind us of what was at stake in that global conflict, of the immense challenges faced, and of the extraordinary solutions that human beings are capable of when pushed to their limits. The Mosquito's story is not simply a tale of war. It is a lesson in resilience, creativity, and the indomitable spirit of those who refuse to accept defeat. And it is a story that still resonates deeply in a world that continues to grapple with complex challenges and existential threats. The lesson of the Mosquito is clear. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, innovation can change everything. When conventional thinking says that something is impossible, the boldness to try a different path can lead to extraordinary breakthroughs. When resources are scarce, resourcefulness and creativity can fill the gap. When the enemy is stronger, faster, or more numerous, intelligence and adaptability can turn the tide. The Mosquito embodies all of these truths, and in doing so, it offers a blueprint not just for military success, but for human achievement in every field. It's also a reminder that history is not written solely by the most obvious heroes. The Mosquito was not the star of grand propaganda films or the subject of rousing speeches. It didn't capture the popular imagination in the same way that the Spitfire did during the Battle of Britain, nor did it dominate headlines like the massive B-29 bombers that brought the war in the Pacific to an end. It worked quietly, precisely, and relentlessly, striking targets with surgical accuracy, gathering intelligence in the shadows, and shaping the course of the war in ways that were often invisible but always significant. Its impact was subtle but profound, and it proves that true power does not always announce itself with fanfare. The Mosquito also stands as a monument to collaboration. It was not the product of a single genius or a single company, but the result of thousands of people working together toward a common goal. From the engineers who sketched its lines to the carpenters who shaped its wooden skin, from the factory workers who assembled its components to the pilots and navigators who risked their lives flying it into enemy skies, every one of them contributed to its success. In a time of crisis when nations were fighting for their very survival, the Mosquito showed what can be accomplished when people unite their talents, their skills, and their determination. And perhaps this is why the Mosquito's story still holds such power today. It reminds us that the qualities that defined its creation and its success, creativity, adaptability, courage, collaboration, are not confined to any one era. They are timeless. They are the same qualities that drive innovation in technology, that fuel progress in science, that solve the complex problems facing humanity in the 21st century. The world may have changed dramatically since the Mosquito first took to the skies, but the principles it embodies remain as vital as ever. When we look at the Mosquito today, whether in a museum, an air show, or a grainy black and white photograph, we are not just looking at an aircraft. We are looking at a symbol of what human beings are capable of when they dare to defy expectations. We are looking at a reminder that limitations are not the end of the story, but the beginning of innovation. And we are looking at proof that even in the darkest times, brilliance can emerge from the most unlikely places. It's fitting, then, that the Mosquito earned a nickname that captured its essence so perfectly: the Wooden Wonder. It was, quite literally, a wonder, a marvel of design, ingenuity, and performance. But it was also a wonder in a deeper sense. It embodied the wonder of human creativity, the wonder of what can be achieved when imagination and necessity collide, and the wonder of how something so seemingly ordinary, wood, glue, and determination, could achieve something so extraordinary. In the final analysis, the Mosquito's story is not just a chapter in the history of aviation. It is a chapter in the story of humanity itself. It is a story about how we face challenges, how we adapt, how we innovate, and how we overcome. It is a story about refusing to accept the world as it is and instead daring to imagine what it could be. And it is a story about how sometimes the greatest victories are not won with brute force, but with intelligence, creativity, and courage. As the sun sets on the generation that built and flew the Mosquito, the responsibility of keeping its story alive passes to us. We must remember not just the aircraft itself, but the lessons it teaches. We must remember that innovation is often born of necessity, that courage often begins with a single bold idea, and that the solutions to our greatest challenges may come from the most unexpected places. And above all, we must remember that, like the Mosquito, we too are capable of achieving the extraordinary, if only we have the imagination to try. The Mosquito may no longer streak across the skies of Europe, but its spirit lives on, in every aircraft that relies on speed rather than armor, in every mission that prizes precision over brute force, and in every innovation born of creativity and necessity. It lives on in the hearts of those who are inspired by its story, and in the minds of those who seek to follow its example. And as long as humanity continues to dream, to innovate, and to push the boundaries of what is possible, the Wooden Wonder will never truly fade from history. So when we speak of the greatest achievements of the Second World War, the battles fought, the sacrifices made, the victories won, let us not forget the humble wooden aircraft that changed the course of the conflict. Let us remember the Mosquito, The plane that defied the odds, outpaced the enemy, and proved that even in the most desperate of times, brilliance can take flight.